This meeting is being recorded.
Hey everybody, it's Mike Young, 55 years young this year anyway when I'm recording this video. I'm here with the renowned Dr. Peter Rogers. We're going to discuss another aspect of health span and longevity. And this time we're going to get into high fat foods. And you know, if you ask me, I travel a lot. My wife and I travel. That's what I see everywhere. It's high fat, high salt. Doesn't matter if it's, of course, animal products are bad for you, but it doesn't matter if it's animal products or even plant foods that people are eating. It's high fat, high salt. So in this video, we're going to take a dive into why the high fat's bad for you and talk about specific types of plant-based foods that you really got to watch out. So welcome, Dr. Rogers.
Hey.
All right, well, Dr. Rogers, let's talk about the worst in my mind. The worst thing, I don't even call it a food. I mean, it's oil, okay? 100% calories from fat. What do you have to say about oil? Let's get that one first.
Yeah, all oils are bad. They're all bad. They all are damaging the blood flow. They all increase your risk of atherosclerosis. They all have 9 calories per gram. They all make you fat. There's nothing good about oil. You don't want to eat them. I think they're all bad. I think I see this as, you know, remember when in the Iliad and the Odyssey, there was the battle between the Greeks and the Trojans, okay? And they come to a stalemate, and they use the Trojan horse to trick the Trojans and allow them into the city, and then they destroyed Troy and burned it down afterwards. What I'm trying to say is, I think the Trojan horse of the vegan diet is good fats, that slogan. You need to get your good fats. It's a way used to make all these vegans fat and sick, and you know they're also gullible. They go for it. It's a bad idea.
Well, oil. Okay, some people say, I hear that certain oils are good for you. You're telling me all oils are bad. What is
that? They're all bad for you. All of them decrease blood flow. They all are associated with increased obesity. Sat fat has the most effect to initially increase atherosclerosis, but all of them trend in that direction. Anything that's making you gain weight is going to be bad. So we can kind of go through them one at a time. It'll make sense. First of all, it's olive oil, which is a masterpiece of marketing. They call it extra virgin olive oil, like you're getting a new virgin bride. But in reality, it's this highly processed chemical foods, typically about 11 to 14% saturated fat, which is very atherogenic. It's about 30%, depending on the brand. Let's say in that ballpark, as high as 30%. Well, actually, they're going to be a little less than that, but still, there's lots and lots of omega-6 fats in those things. Cooking oils, omega-6 cooking oils are very bad for blood flow. But even the MUFAs, the monounsaturated fatty acids, omega-9 fats, that's the characteristic thing of olive oil, it's still quite atherogenic. In different studies with monkeys, with rodents, and on humans, it was all shown to be as atherogenic as the other types of fat. So even though it doesn't increase your LDL cholesterol as much, you still end up with just as much atherosclerosis. So there's no win in there. There's no benefit. It's prothrombotic. It increases the tendency of your blood to clot, decreases the ability of your arteries to vasodilate. It's high in advanced glycation end products.
All right. What about coconut oil? I tell people that's the worst of all the oils.
Well, that's very high in saturated fat. I mean, it's just stupid. There's nothing. There's no winning game here. It's all just fat is bad. I can tell you, Nathan Pritikin, after reviewing all the literature on fat back in the 1970s, early 1980s, he said fat is bad. They're all bad. Dr. McDougall said fat is the worst toxin in the Western diet. And all these high-fat diets, they cause atherosclerosis. Well, they cause hypertension, and they cause diabetes, and diabetes and hypertension cause atherosclerosis. People plug up their arteries in their brains, their heart, their Johnson, everywhere else, and they're debilitated and weak and sick. That's just a typical way it goes. And it's sort of like, how are you going to win the game? Eat low fat, become 100% vegan, no oils.
Okay. Well, you mentioned diabetes, insulin resistance. Now, that is also the gateway drug kind of to all these other like issues, other diseases. What is it like? You hear like chronic fatigue syndrome or other things that are really hard to figure out, right? Isn't all that potentially related?
Well, I think diabetes and hypertension are sort of the gateway diseases. Like you might say marijuana is the gateway drug to substance abuse. Diabetes and hypertension are the gateway diseases to the chronic Western pattern of diseases. There's other things that factor in there, but I would say you want to minimize your fat intake as much as you possibly can. It's impossible to be too low in fats. They've fed people like Kempner 2% of calories from fat. There's been other studies where they fed people less than 1% of calories from fat. There's no way you're going to get there on any diet of foods that you've chosen for yourself.
Okay. All right. So that's the idea. Like you said, low fat. So oil's the worst. Don't have one single drop. Don't even think about it. I don't even think of it as a food. Like you said, it's processed, right? Everybody knows processed food is bad for you. Well, oil, you never see a bottle of oil in nature. So just forget about that. Now, but still, if you're eating 100% plant-based, you got to watch out for some other things, right? You got to watch out for nuts, seeds, avocado, and soy. These are high-fat foods that are potentially whole foods, right?
Yeah, I also want to just say something about patience. Like, imagine you called me on the phone and said, Pete, can you take a look at this film? Can you look at this brain MRI, CAT scan, chest, abdomen, pelvis, or take a look at this patient's chart? And you told me the patient was, let's say, 55 years of age and older. I would not even look in the chart. I would automatically assume in the United States of America, I would automatically assume without looking at the chart, automatically, the patient was pre-diabetic or diabetic, that they were hypertensive, and they had coronary artery disease. Those diseases are so common, almost all of the patients have them. So what I'm trying to say is everybody has high-fat disease in the United States. Almost everybody. 98% of the patients. It's just taken for granted. When I look in the chart and the patient had several small strokes, the internal medicine doctors will write normal aging. Patients are expected to have a couple little strokes. And what I'm trying to say is in the Western countries eating this high-fat diet, yeah, they're going to have a couple little strokes, most of them. So what I'm saying is this is not normal. It doesn't have to be that way. But you're only going to win this game by eating a low-fat vegan is the only diet shown to reverse atherosclerosis. And it has by far the best results for preventing atherosclerosis. So it's sort of like, it's obviously the best.
Yeah, and like you said, it's epidemic. We see out here on the streets, all of the foods I see, high fat everywhere. Doesn't matter if it's plant-based or vegan, still high fat. So like you said, that's what you're. I mean, it's so not so good, but that's why I want to get into whole foods here.
Oh yeah,
seeds, avocados.
How many patients in my career have I seen with an omega-3 deficiency? Zero. Okay, you know. Give me a break. This is all hyped up stuff to sell supplements, okay? You can have short gut syndrome where a patient's had a whole bunch of surgeries for, let's say, Crohn's disease, and they have trouble absorbing stuff. Maybe they're going to end up being fed with hyperalimentation or something. All that stuff is super, super rare, but theoretically could happen versus patients eating high-fat diet every day. Okay, so anyways, you want to go over a different type of fat now? Which one?
Exactly. The nuts, the seeds, the avocados. These are whole foods. People say, hey, it's whole foods. What could be wrong with it?
Yeah, well, they're still super fat. Like avocados are a disaster. What I think they're in the ballpark for around 85% fat. And the other thing about avocados, and normally in nature, they're only in season about 2 weeks out of the year. So you couldn't eat that many. And nowadays they spray this aPeel stuff on them. And I read the chem data sheets on the allowable contaminants. They're really, really bad. I think one of them is something, I forget the exact name, acetonitrile or something. It's a variant upon cyanide. They're fungal inhibitors. And there were other ones that are permissible in some small amounts. These things were super toxic. I would never eat that. I would never eat an avocado. I would never eat guacamole because of this.
Because of the chemicals, the fungal inhibitors that damage your mitochondria. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would never eat it to begin with because it's 85% fat. But now when you spray this other crap on it, it's basically like poison fat. That's what it is, poison fat. Why would I want that? It's for children.
You got in the percentages. We talked about oil as being 100% calories from fat. Avocado super high, 85. I think I've heard you mention, and we mentioned too, 10% calories from fat as being like the benchmark. Is that correct?
Yeah, a reasonable goal is to try and end up about 80-10-10, with 80% of the calories from carbohydrate, about 10% from fat, about 10% from protein. If you can get your fat and your protein a little lower than that, that's good. But that would sort of be, you know, about the upper level of what you would want it.
Mm-hmm. So avocados, it's almost 100%, 85. How about the nuts and seeds? What about those?
Nuts are super fat. Nuts are in the ballpark of about 70 to 90% of calories from fat. I think nuts are, you know, maybe you can have one for Christmas. Okay. I think for the average middle-aged and older person, you really don't want that. Okay. Most of us ate some version of a SAD diet or a Western diet when we were younger, or a Mediterranean diet when we were younger. And so we're trying to optimize our health. The older you get, the more fragile you get. And nuts aren't just bad because they're high fat. They're also high in like they have what's called potential renal acid load. They're acidic. they also have high advanced glycation end products. So they have a bit of a diabetogenic, atherogenic characteristics to them, and inflammatory with the advanced glycation end products. That can cause problems because they can glycate things, and that can lead to contribute to autoimmune disease. I don't think it by itself is going to cause it unless you ate a heck of a lot of them, but there's no winner there. There's nothing I want there.
Well, that's it. Autoimmune. That's what I was searching for earlier. I mean, is clogging up your cells with fat, is that a way to develop these autoimmunes? Is it a pathway?
Well, I think what can happen is you can damage things by glycating them. And the glycation, you can get what's called, the receptor for advanced glycation end products, the RAGE receptor advanced glycation end products. And that can activate inflammatory pathways like this NADPH oxidase system that produces oxidative stress, superoxides. But the bottom line is, when I look at a deal, I ask myself, is there a win here? Is there something I need? Will I benefit from this? What's the risk benefit ratio? Right. And I don't see any benefit with these high fat foods. None. Well, some people say, well, there is nutrition, right? We're talking about a whole food. There's nutrition in an avocado. There's nutrition in nuts. There's some nutrition in seeds. Can you get this nutrition somewhere else? Or do you have to eat those things? Or do you never have to eat those things? Well, yeah, you don't ever have to eat them. You can easily get better nutrition elsewhere. So why go there would be my attitude about it. Like, a lot of times people try to say, flax and soy are good. I think they both have major, major problems. And I don't see any advantage to eating them. Yeah. Well, we'll get into soy in a second, but let me ask you about percentage of calories from fat. Now, we talked about that a couple times here already. The average person looks on the label, they don't see it, but they have to calculate that, right? I mean, they have to figure that out for themselves because nobody's going to give you that number. And if we're talking about 10%, I think most people will find if they start calculating their prepared foods, they're looking at more like 30 to 40% for every single thing that they're eating. That's what I've seen. Yeah, most people are eating much, much, much higher fat than they realize. And, you only get one life. You want to take good care of your body because you have to the same body has to last your whole life. Hopefully you'll make it to 80, 90 or longer, but you want your body to be in good shape. And what I see, the typical American I see, by the time they're 55, they're fat, sick, and stupid. When I say stupid, I mean they're cognitively slow. They've lost that energetic zest. They've lost that capacity for quick nuance and repartee in a conversation. They can still find their way home, but they're not doing so well. They've clearly aged, quite severely. And it doesn't have to be that way. I'm 61. I don't have any medical problems. And, a lot of people, I look at a lot of brains that are clean, even at 80 years of age. The majority are not. But I do see a significant number of clean ones. All right. Well, and you're a radiologist, just so people know. So you look at these images all day long. You see what's out there, what the patients are like. Right. I started out as an imaging guided surgeon, which is also called interventional radiologist. I also trained in endovascular brain surgery, but I decided not to take it because neurosurgery's taken it over. And so then I primarily work as a neuroradiologist, general radiologist, and I do a little bit of interventional radiology still. And then this is a hobby for me to do all this nutrition stuff because I love it. It's the most powerful thing in all of medicine by far. So I wish I could make a living doing it because it's the best thing, but I just do it as a hobby because there's no money in it for me. Well, I'm very thankful that you do because you speak the truth. I know you're very direct, and I think our audience appreciates that because it gets the point across very quickly. And kind of like you alluded to, no one's really hearing this from their regular physicians, right? They're not hearing this information. Well, doctors don't learn anything about nutrition in medical school. They don't learn the three most important subjects, nutrition, epidemiology, and toxicology. That's what disease is all about, and they don't know anything about it. So the truth of the matter is, in terms of the common Western diseases, the American physicians in conventional medicine are grossly incompetent. They are completely incompetent and ignorant. They really are terrible. They don't even know what they're talking about. And I can tell you, I have friends who, some friends are trying to learn this stuff, and they'll tell me about the smartest internal medicine doctors. And I know these guys. These are really bright guys with encyclopedic IQs. They don't know anything. They don't even know what we've talked about so far in this lecture. They don't know anything about nutrition because it's simply not in the textbooks at all. Zero, none. Right. Now, obviously, there's big reasons for that. There's existing parts of the medical system that are making lots of money, as we've talked about, and they don't want to go away. So that's a giant motivation.
but let me ask you on the other side of this, okay? In terms of a human being like myself or someone else desiring fat, do you think that there is some type of way that we've evolved over time on the earth where we needed to eat lots of fat in the past, where we don't need to do that anymore, and there's been a change there? What do you think?
Well, I think our ancestors worried about starving to death. So for them to encounter fat, they get some reward receptors going off inside their body because the body values high caloric density food because that'll help it to survive. We can store unlimited amounts of fat on our body. And let's say you're in a spot with a cold winter, that'll help you get through the winter being fat.
I don't have much. So,
yeah. But for the modern person, starvation never comes. They just keep piling more fat on themselves. And I can tell you, I look at patients all day, and I can tell from across the room, this patient's probably in such and such an age group by how degenerated and destroyed their spine is, by how many small strokes they have in their brain, by how much their brain is shrunken and atrophied. So what I'm saying is, as you get older, you get more fragile. The body has less physiologic reserve to repair problems. So the smart move is, how can I improve all my habits, all my diet, everything, so that I can, continue to be highly functional as long as possible. That's the proper attitude.
Okay, let me ask a question about what you said about humans needing to try to survive in the past. I mean, I allude this to a survival diet. Like in the past, humans, we weren't sure if we were going to continue as a species, right? So we were trying to survive. There was a lot of questions about, I don't think we didn't have houses. Agriculture hadn't been invented. Who knew what was going on, right? But now we're in a time of overabundance, and it feels like the fat problem is almost like overnutrition. And I feel like most humans are still stuck in the mindset of that, that ingrained nature to survive when they could be thinking about thriving instead. And when you're thinking about thriving, then you got to take all these points that you brought up here about limiting the fats, right? That's the only way you're going to thrive as a human. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what you need to do to keep your arteries open, to give yourself the best chance to stay healthy. And also for medicine, the way it works is you make money in medicine by selling things. The most common thing that medicine sells is a drug. You match the ill to the pill and you send a bill. If you cure a patient, you lose a customer. So there is zero incentive. There's a major conflict of interest with conventional medicine and patient care. Yeah. And you can't cure a dietary disease with a pill, so the patient's never cured, which works out well for conventional medicine because they keep them hooked on drugs for life. They turn them into a cash cow and they milk them every day. So the only thing that cures these Western diseases, dietary diseases, is to eat a low-fat vegan diet with no oil. That's what works.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you got me. Everything makes sense. And we've gone through so much history here. I think it lines up. Most people will be able to understand this. And they may never have heard this explanation before because you hear little things about how, certain things are better for you, certain things are worse. And like we talked about, you can't even look at a nutritional label and find the percentage of calories from fat. And just in case you're wondering out there how to calculate it, every gram of a serving of fat is 9 calories. Is that correct, Dr. Rogers? So if you have like let's say you got 100 calorie serving, you got 4 grams of fat. Doesn't sound like much, but 4 times 3 is 36. 36 into 100 is 36% calories from fat. So you're supposed to limit that to 10%, right? So somebody who thinks they're doing good is really severely harming themselves at every meal. Right? I mean, that's how I would look at that.
That's pretty typical. People eat much worse than they think they do. Because I talk to very sick patients all the time, and they usually say something, "Oh, I eat pretty good. I eat pretty good." And I'm like, "Oh, give me an example of what you eat." They go, "Well, I try to eat a lot of chicken, a lot of fish." I said, "Those are terrible foods." They go, "Well, I have olive oil too." That's a terrible food. So they don't even know what they're doing at all. And the typical patient is like a total ignoramus. Typical thing they'll say is, "Well, it's just genetic. It's genetic. It's in my family. Everybody's got heart disease in my family. My sister had a heart attack. My brother had a heart attack. We both had open heart surgery." Yeah. And he goes, "It's just genetic." I go, "No, it's not genetic. It's because you all eat the same thing."
Yeah, yeah.
There's no heart attacks in other populations where they eat low-fat plant-based diets. There's no genetic heart attacks.
Yeah, all right. Now let's talk about some other things that people do. They kind of try to transition, okay? Like someone who's eating animal meat, like you said, they may transition to Impossible Meat or Beyond Meat. And I've looked at some of those things, and they're so high as a percentage of calories from fat, right? I mean, it may be a transition that you got to get out of fast, but there is no way that's going to be hard or helping your health, is it?
No, all that fake meat is a disaster. I would never touch that stuff.
Okay.
Ever.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah. Because too high in fat and too high in sodium at the beginning, that's right away. I'm sure there's other things that are compromised there as well.
Yeah, whenever you make these fake foods, there are tons and tons of chemicals that go into them. These things they're not even food. You shouldn't be eating that stuff. We're made to eat stuff that grows outside in plants, okay? It's, I trust God's way a lot more than I trust man's way, okay? Natural occurring things are what we're made for. We're not made for these chemical factory experiments.
Yeah. So do you think that anyone could improve their health by eating those plant-based meats, or should they?
No.
No, they should just try to skip them right over.
I think it's insane to eat those things. I think you're going to have really bad health. See, most people sort of had this idea, well, I'm a nice person and I eat better than my cousin, so I'll probably be okay. No, I can tell you about 95% of people don't age well in my experience. You don't want to be one of them, okay? Mm-hmm. Almost all the patients I see, they have fatty liver, they've got degenerated spines, atrophic brains, they look like crap. You don't want to be that way. You want to say, I want to be the best I can possibly do, and then you've got good odds. But this idea of, well, I'm doing better than most people, that's for morons, because most people are not doing well.
Sick. The average person is sick for sure. And we've talked about this before when we've discussed similar concepts that you don't know. Like even you as a physician, you can't tell somebody, okay, well, this is the line that you can't cross or you're going to develop disease. Like nobody knows where that line is. So just like you said, you have to do the best you can unless you want to be sick.
Right, because there's just so much illness and you get more fragile as you get older. You make less endothelial precursor cells. You make less nitric oxide in your endothelium. Your immune system gets weaker. For example, I look at a lot of CAT scans of the neck and MRIs of the neck. And what I see is the older people get, the more their lymph nodes start shrinking. Their immune system gets weaker. They're more vulnerable to cancer. So the smart move is help your immune system. High-fat meals, they suppress the immune system, which makes it less able to fight cancer. You don't want to do that. High-sodium meals, they are detrimental to immune system function. You don't want to do that because you need your immune system working. That's what removes cancer. Your immune system heals just about everything in your body, Mm-hmm. So be nice to it.
Yeah,
Give it
of course.
Eat low-fat vegan diet.
All right, now let's move on to the more controversial one. Some people are on one side of this, some people are on the other. Soy, okay? Some people say, oh, soy, it's one of the best beneficial. Look at all the people in Southeast Asia, and other people are saying, no, it causes problems. And then most people don't even realize that the soybean, I think, is 40% calories from fat. And then tofu, I think it averages about 55% calories from fat. So it's a high-fat food in addition to all that. So what can you tell us about soy overall? What's your take on it?
Well, I think you can look at sort of the structure of the world. What I mean by that is there are very, very rich people. And from what I can tell, the very, very, very rich are kind of pissed off. They think that the world is far too overpopulated. Okay. So whatever I might think or whatever I might think is good, I have zero ability to change anything. Okay. Other than, what I eat for myself for dinner. Whereas the very, 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 very rich and powerful, they have a lot of ability to affect things. For example, almost everything subsidized is bad for you. All right. Yeah. Soy is subsidized, right? It causes a dramatic drop in sperm production. Okay. It increases the risk of premature puberty. It damages the thyroid. It damages, it's dangerous to the baby, okay, for the mother to be having soy. It's often processed with hexane, which is a neurotoxin. And so what I'm saying is, if I wanted to lower the population, soy would be perfect. Damaging the female reproductive tract, lowering male sperm counts, feminizing men, perfect, okay? Okay, and then you can always trick all these idiots. Just put out some advertising and they'll go, oh, it's a good health food. Like I've heard people quoting some research paper saying that, oh, there's no estrogenic side effects in soy. Yeah, right. The guy who wrote that paper was the head of the Soy Institute. Okay. And you start looking, go back to the old papers and you'll see premature puberty, all kinds of reproductive problems, for example. And then the fact that it's processed with hexane, again, that's a neurotoxin. You want to stay away from that. It increases insulin-like growth factor. That's also bad. As you mentioned, it's high fat. The closer you look at soy, the worse it gets. It's off the charts estrogenic. Oh, and here's the other thing they tell you about estrogen. They go, well, it only affects the good estrogen receptors, not the bad estrogen receptors. That's not true. In the Stefan Miller paper, it affected both of them about the same. So what I'm trying to say is there's like a bodyguard of lies around soy to make it seem much better than it is. Okay. And then they say, oh, well, it protects you from breast cancer. That's actually not true either. There's some papers say it's a little bit protective. Other papers say, no, not. It increases breast cancer. And I came to the conclusion after reading a bunch of them, you can't tell. Okay. And what typically happens is original papers come out where they're just trying to figure things out and they say something bad about the consumer product. But then the company comes along with billions of dollars. It just buys a journal, buys a scientist and say, make soy look good. And if they don't make soy look good, the paper doesn't get published. The scientist never gets another dime for grant money. So they have to play ball with the big corporations. There's no way around it if you want to keep your job as a scientist. They can even go to your university and just have you fired. Say, look, we'll donate $1 million, just fire this jerk. Because they have to send a message that they're not going to tolerate negative research about their product. And they've got the power to do that. Okay. What else is subsidized? Aluminum in your water. That also drops your sperm counts. That also causes cognitive decline. It also causes leaky gut. Okay. It also increases your risk of cancer, breast cancer, for example, with some estrogen. So what I'm trying to say is what else is subsidized in your tap water? Fluoride. That lowers your sperm counts. That also increases cancer. That also increases cognitive decline. You see a pattern here? Decreased cognitive decline, decreased fertility, increased cancer. It's pretty routine. Those are subsidized things. What else is subsidized? Corn. What do they throw in there? Atrazine. What is atrazine? It feminizes people. It turns a male frog into a female frog. It inhibits intermitochondrial membrane electron transport complex number 3. So it's highly estrogenic. It saps your energy away. And what are the additional side effects of that? We don't know for sure, but they're all bad. Phosphate, subsidized on the soy. That's typically on the non-organic soy. It's an excitotoxin, causes brain damage. It causes leaky gut, increasing your incidence of autoimmune disease, increasing your incidence of prothrombotic blood from amyloid clotting. Okay. It also has some estrogenic properties. So all of these things are pushing towards making people stupid, making them infertile, making them sick. Is it all just a coincidence? Maybe.
Yeah. Well, also, I will say for soy, when I go out to eat, when I see soy on the menu, people are like, oh, you got this vegan thing. Well, almost always it's fried too. Fried in oil, of course. So it's even higher fat than people think. And they didn't even realize it was high fat to begin with. It's just like, you can't, kind of like you're saying, when you really think about things, when you really analyze things, you realize that the way things are set up is just, you're not going to be successful unless you kind of step outside of that. Because like we said here, we're talking about whole foods. Soybean is a whole food. The avocado is a whole food. Nuts, seeds, these are whole foods. But as you've mentioned, not only do you not need them, right? You don't need soy as part of, you're not going to miss anything if you don't use soy or eat soy anymore. Same thing with the avocados, nuts, and seeds. But for some reason, people think that you need to eat these things when the opposite.
Right. Yeah. Well, most people don't really have much, sophistication in science. They're functional illiterates. I think these things are designed to essentially, sterilize the proles. Okay. That's the purpose of all this stuff. I mean,
well,
it's like,
for what you're
there's something called consilience. Consilience means that I see one body of evidence going in this direction, but by itself, it's kind of weak. And then I see another body of evidence going the same way. By itself, it's kind of weak. But then I see another one and another one and another one and another one and another one. And they all point towards dropping cognitive function, dropping fertility, dropping lifespan. I'm like, well, gee, there seems to be a pattern here. And that's the pattern I see. And the big one getting hyped these days now, too, is flax, which guess what? To me, flax and soy are like Tweedledee and Tweedledum, pretty much the same thing.
Well, flax is
estrogenic. Yeah. It's estrogenic. It's high fat. It's goitrogenic. Okay. And then these omega-3s, I think they're pretty overrated. We get enough from low-fat plant foods. That's been covered pretty extensively in the past, and Dr. McDougall's written all about that. So when you start ingesting higher and higher omega-3 amounts, you get some immune suppression. You run the risk of increasing your risk of atrial fibrillation, increasing your risk of cancer, metastatic disease. I think this whole thing is totally overhyped. You need more omega-3s. Because you got to remember, it's $1 billion product. And basically also there's a popularity game to be played. Okay. If you promote popular things like say, oh, coffee is wonderful for you, everybody should be taking omega-3s, everybody should be eating soy, you'll get invited to all these corporate like channels that want to promote something. So you become popular. I've already, accepted the fact I'll never be popular. I'm just going to tell the truth.
Well, tell the truth. That's a good thing. Okay. So, all right. So all the things we talked about, you don't need. You don't need oil. You don't need any seeds, including flaxseed. You don't need any nuts. You don't need any soy. You don't need any of those things. So there's plenty of other plant foods you can choose from, and all of them are lower in fat, right? Than those foods we just mentioned. So it's a win in all directions. That's a good summary from my point of view, anyway. And another thing I want to talk about is about soy. A little bit more, not necessarily the fat content, although we've touched on that. That's what the main point of this video is. I want to talk about, like, if you know much about miso and how people will use that as a soy product, and because they don't want to add salt to food, but yet miso is very high in sodium. And, that's another thing I think where people haven't quite figured all that out yet, kind of like a lot of the things we're talking about in this video here today.
Yeah, I just read one thing about miso that said it was quite high in sodium, so I wouldn't eat this stuff, and I wouldn't eat anything with soy in it to begin with. But
okay, so
quite a bit of sodium.
So you got all the negatives of soy by having miso, and then you did see that they're very high in salt. But the people that add miso to their prepared foods, they think, oh, we're doing you a favor because we're not explicitly adding that isolate of salt to your food. We're using this fermented sodium in the miso, and it's all going to be better for you somehow.
No, I don't think so. I'm not aware of that. It doesn't sound right, that logic.
Yeah, it doesn't to me either. I know, that's why I wanted to make sure that you're at least aware of this going on, because we're traveling a lot. We see what goes on at different events where people try to produce food that doesn't have that. They say it has no added salt, yet they're adding miso to almost everything. So it's just something to be another thing, another way that unless you're really paying attention, they're gonna get you again in that factor. All right, so do you have any slides for us?
Oh yeah, I got some slides. Yeah, you want me to show some slides?
Absolutely.
All right. So let me share my screen here. Okay. Can you see my slide now? The olive tree with the bed?
I see it. Yep.
Okay, so basically, I got a lot of Greek friends, and they get pissed off at me when I criticize olive oil because it goes back all to their history. The bed of Odysseus and Penelope, going back to the Iliad and the Odyssey, was built around an olive tree. Basically, sat fat, the most common sat fat in the body is palmitic acid, C16, meaning 16 carbons, 0 for 0 double bonds. Saturated fat, meaning that all the carbons are saturated with hydrogens. There are no double bonds. There are 16 carbons in total. Fatty acid has a carboxylic acid at the end. So that's your standard sat fat. Sat fat basically kind of means animal fat because animal foods are much higher in sat fat. So sat fat, no double bonds. Here's a MUFA, monounsaturated fat, meaning unsaturation means double bond. There's a single double bond. Like olive oil would be a MUFA, omega-9. This is the omega end. Okay, this is the carboxylic end. All right, so you count the number of carbons till you get to the double bond. So this one, the first double bond's at carbon number 6 from the omega end. So this would be an omega-6 fat, okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, another thing that often gets talked about in the context of olive oil is something called polyphenols. They go, oh, olive oil is so wonderful, all these polyphenols. I'm like, yeah, give me a break. I'm not so sure about the polyphenols. Okay, show me the individual ones and let me know what their effects are, because here's a polyphenol for you. Bisphenol, bis meaning 2 at opposite locations. So here's a phenol group. It's an aromatic, C6 ring with 3 double bonds in it. That's called a benzene ring, and a hydroxyl group. This combination, a benzene ring and a hydroxyl group, this is also called an aromatic ring. These two together is a phenol group. Well, guess what? That's what activates the estrogen receptor. So, these polyphenols, are you going to be activating estrogen receptors? I would want to know that for sure. That'd be another thing I would want to avoid. Estrogen is a fat storage hormone. If you're activating estrogen receptors, you're potentially predisposing to obesity because it gets the body to store fat in case the baby needs it. Estrogen levels go up a lot when a woman's pregnant. And then here's just some old data. Peter Quoll in the 1950s, Meyer Friedman, Ray Rosenman did more of the same in the 1960s. You feed a patient SAT fat, you can check their blood lipids every 30 minutes. At peak lipemia, highest level of fat in their blood, they're most likely to get cardiac angina episodes. This was done with cardiac angina patients, people with recurrent chest pain due to coronary artery disease, coronary artery stenosis from atherosclerosis. You feed them polyunsaturated fat, PUFAs, it's even worse. Their blood stays sludged, hyperlipidemic, thick for a more prolonged amount of time. They get more angina. So you're not going to win with these fats. They're all bad, all right? And then these guys, Meyer Friedman, Ray Rosenman, ophthalmologists, showed them plugging up the small arteries in the eye. And like I said, there's, olive trees. I never saw one that had a faucet on it for olive oil. Olive oil is an industrial processed food. It's often put in these green bottles, which, according to Lead Safe Mama, who tests everything for lead, she claims they pretty routinely contain lead. They put them in these bottles to decrease oxidation, let's say from the sunlight, for example, because that'll cause more lipid peroxidation, which is bad, means that it goes rancid, and it can cause these lipid peroxidation chain reactions in your body and damage tissues like your plasma membranes, for example. Okay, Mamavation, kind of like Mama Nation, is another one of these sites where a mother's kids were sick. I think 2 of her kids got autism. She was pissed off about that, and she became very heavily involved in product testing. And she said 100% of the olive oils she tested all had traces of phthalates, meaning they contained plastic. Okay.
Yeah.
And a lot of times too, it's hard there's all kinds of things I see on the internet about people thinking they're buying the highest quality olive oil and they're getting some lousy brand. So like I said, it's great marketing. It increases blood triglycerides. Blood triglycerides, by the way, cause blood sludging on the blood cells. They decrease flow-mediated dilation, so they decrease the ability of an artery to dilate, meaning they decrease the ability of the artery to provide blood flow to your tissue. That's bad. Vogel is a famous cardiologist who did these ultrasound studies, and he was measuring flow at 3 hours after eating postprandial. But usually, as I showed you in that previous diagram, the decreases in blood flow, they get worse as you head out to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. So if they had tested it later, it would have been worse, would be my expectation. Okay. Other studies like Blankenhorn, 1978, he's working with cardiology research. It didn't matter what type of fat the patient ate, whatever fat they ate, sat fat, MUFA, PUFA, they all were, had equivalent atherosclerotic effect. The only way to reduce atherosclerosis was to reduce total fat intake. Okay, and there's been other studies of that. This guy named Rudell had the same results. MUFAs were not atheroprotected. They were just as bad as SFAs. African green monkey study. The African green monkeys have similar metabolism to human, it's thought, with regard to lipids. No protective benefit from switching from sat fat to MUFA. Okay, and like I said, I repeated that study in rodents, got the same thing. You get increased triglycerides, increased factor VII. So this is prothrombotic. Increased triglyceride, that sludges the blood. That's prothrombotic as well. Okay, all 5 different types of fat cause similar postprandial increases in plasma triglycerides and clotting factors. That's bad.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, they've also found lipids have a tendency to diffuse through plasma membranes, so it's hard to keep them out of skeletal muscle cells, meaning they have a tendency to cause insulin resistance. Okay, so it's good to minimize your dietary fat. Let's see here.
When you say they have a tendency to cause insulin resistance, is there a direct correlation there with the fat or not?
Yeah, the higher fat you feed, but it's especially saturated fat. Saturated fat is the most acutely diabetogenic. It has the most rapid effect to increase insulin resistance. And the reason especially it's thought is because in the process of beta oxidation, you have an additional step with sat fat that leads to more electron carriers being produced, more like NADH going to the intermitochondrial membrane. So that's why they think sat fat is the worst. But all of these things are going to start pumping up your blood lipids. So they're all going to be atherogenic, and they're all going to be worsening for your insulin function over time, but not as acutely as sat fat. So
okay,
sat fat would be the worst one in the short term for having increased insulin resistance.
All right, so saturated fat is in almost all animal products, right? And then it's in coconut and coconut oil, coconut meat, coconut oil.
Right. It's all that stuff is bad. Yeah. Fat is always bad. You want to, no matter what you do, you're always going to get all the fat you need. So don't go looking for it. It's sort of what I'm saying here.
Right.
This is Dr. McDougall wrote a newsletter. It was December 4, 2013, just where he talks about all the stuff we just talked about. This is Dr. McDougall interviewing David Blankenthorne, who wrote these papers. Didn't matter what type of fat it was. They all were atherogenic. So they all increased coronary artery disease. Here's another paper. This was by Rudell. This guy did a lot of this research. This one with the African green monkeys. MUFAs were just as atherogenic as saturated fat. In some, the monkeys fed monounsaturated fat, MUFA, olive oil, for example, developed equivalent amounts of coronary artery atherosclerosis as those fed saturated fat. Okay. In this study, they claimed that the polyunsaturated fats were a little less atherogenic, but polyunsaturated fats are terrible. That's your omega-6 cooking oils. There's a guy by the name of Tetsumori Yamashima, and he writes all about the Calpain-Cathepsin theory of lipid peroxidation. And it's with regard to cooking oils. They basically damage your brain cells in the arcuate nucleus and the hippocampus. They damage the beta cells of the pancreas. He's a Japanese neuroscientist, MD, PhD, who was given the task of trying to figure out why are so many Japanese people becoming demented. And he came to the conclusion it's because they eat more fried food. They eat more omega-6 cooking oils now than they used to. So what I'm trying to say is PUFAs are a terrible food. And olive oil, by the way, is not pure MUFA. You know, it's about in the ballpark, let's say 65, 70%, something in that ballpark of MUFA, but the rest of it is sat fat and omega-6 fat primarily. There's a little bit of omega-3 fat, not much.
Hey, Dr. Rogers, I also like to point out to people that one of the reasons I think in my mind as to why oils are so bad is because it's an isolate of fat, right? Because in almost all cases, you pull off all the fiber, all the water, and most all of the nutrition. So you're left with an isolate that's totally unbalanced. And of course, that's going to cause problems.
Right. There's no antioxidants in it. It can get oxidized and then lead you down that lipid peroxidation path. That's why they put it in those opaque green bottles. This was a talk Dr. Esselstyn gave in a paper he wrote about oils. And basically the monounsaturated fats associated with obesity and diabetes, atherosclerosis, okay, decreased blood flow. They were bad all around. There's no winner here. You don't want, he says, don't have one drop of oil. And Esselstyn diet, there's nothing even close to it, the low-fat vegan diet of Dr. Esselstyn. You know, it's orders of magnitude better than all these other diets for prevention of coronary artery disease. You know, it's the only way to win that game. Let's see here. The reason oil gets added to foods is to make stuff stick to it, you know, like sugar will stick to it with a donut, the salt, the fries, spices to other foods. One thing I was going to say about soy too is soy and flax have estrogenic chemicals off the chart, super high, like thousands of times higher than other foods. And what I said was, you know, if you look at this lady here, you can tell she's got a reason to have high estrogen. She's got breasts, she's got a Virginia. It's very understandable what her body's doing with that estrogen. Take a look at a soy plant. I don't see any breasts. I don't see a Virginia. Why does it have off the chart soy? A woman's estrogen. Why does it have off the chart estrogenics? The point is, when a woman's pregnant, her estrogen levels go way up, and it's one way to make an animal infertile. So the soy plant, some plants like to be eaten. You know, the bear eats an apple, maybe defecates a couple miles down the path in the forest, and you get a new apple tree. But some plants don't like to be eaten, and a way to prevent themselves from being eaten by insects or other animals is to mess around with their hormones. The soy and flax also are goitrogenic. If you damage their thyroid, make them hyperestrogenic, you can decrease their ability to reproduce. And then maybe
so that negative effect in humans is because of a natural way it fights off insects in nature?
Well, I think that's where it comes from. So what I'm saying is it's basically the plant's pesticide, and it considers humans a pest. You know, I think insects were the original pest, but the same thing is applying to us.
Yeah.
You know, if an animal eats you and you want that animal to stop it, you can make that animal infertile. That would be helpful. Make that animal stupid, goitrogenic, and these other problems. And you see a lot of guys who drink a lot of beer, which can get estrogenic chemicals in it, the hops, and they go around with their big fat bellies. They go, oh, I've got a beer belly. And oh, I've got moobs, man boobs. What they don't understand is they really look like a pregnant female. And if you look at a CAT scan of their chest, you'll see some breast glandular tissue in there. That's called gynecomastia. They're developing female breasts. It's nothing to be proud of. So here's the estrogenic levels, you know, really, really high in flax. And it's very high in soy. Look at these levels, you know, thousands of times more than, let's say, beans and a lot of all these other foods, okay? So they're off the chart estrogenic, and flax is much more estrogenic than soy.
Dr. Rogers, I want to point out, soy is a bean, right? It's just like the worst bean. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a bean, right? Yeah.
But all the other beans, all the other ones are fine, right? It's just soy.
Yeah, the other beans are okay. They're like I said, it's thousands of times more estrogenic. You know, like black beans. You know, 9 estrogenic equivalent units for our purposes. Okay.
Yeah.
Phytoestrogens, number of micrograms per 100 milligrams. Okay. Isoflavin in the soy, lignans in the flax, they're off the charts estrogenic. And flax, again, is much more. It was about 4 times as estrogenic as soy. That's why I avoid all this stuff completely. Okay, that's what I meant by Tweedledee and Tweedledum. A lot of the problems for soy are quite similar for flax. And flax is very overhyped. You know, there's a lot of people going around on the internet saying, oh, you need your soy, you need your flax. I don't think you need them at all. I see no evidence of that. I've never seen any paper that told me that was necessary. Like I said, soy is associated with lowered sperm counts in men, abnormal female uterus in women, activates both receptors. This is just a little bit about estrogenic chemicals. I'm not going to get into estrogenic chemicals right now. Oh, and other things they tell you, you'll hear, oh, we need GMO so the world will have enough food supply. BS. They've shown organic farms produce the same yield as conventional farms. They just tell people that because they want to sell their product. They want to develop a monopoly on the market share. They want to control seed production, so the farmer has to basically pay them as much as they want to get seeds. They don't want the farmer having their own plants and collecting their own seeds. Okay, so it's a racket. It's a way to take over market share.
Yeah.
Okay, here's soy. It inhibits thyroid peroxidase, TPO, in rat and human cells. It's goitrogenic. It'll lengthen the female's menstrual cycle. It's toxic to developing fetus, according to this paper here. It's carcinogenic in rodents. Let's see. Oh, another thing too, like I'll just tell you, like my girlfriend, since she's been dating me, she's been becoming a vegan. She says, oh my gosh, my menstrual cycle has totally changed. My periods are much shorter, much less bleeding. I don't get PMS anymore. I sleep better. I'm not emotional. I'm not stressed out. I don't even barely notice it, except I'm having my period. That was also characteristic of other really healthy eating populations. Okay. Yeah, goitrogenic, and it's goitrogenic meaning that it's harmful to the thyroid. Okay, and there's reports of flax also having some goitrogenic properties.
And also, Dr. Rogers, let me also point out that, I mentioned these fake meats and there's other things, there's protein supplements. Most of the time when a plant-based or vegan person is getting something with added protein into it, it seems like it's from soy and they don't even realize that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Soy is the typical cheap protein for processed foods. And so then how much are you getting along with that? Estrogen and fat and everything else bad and hexane. Okay, here's that Stefan Mueller paper called Phytoestrogens and their human metabolites and, effect on estrogen receptors, ER alpha, ER beta. And the point was it was activating both, the alpha so-called bad ones, okay, not just the so-called good ones, the beta ones. So all that nonsense about soy only activating the good receptors is not true. Okay, there was activation of ER alpha even greater than ER beta in this one part of the paper. Okay, it increased insulin-like growth factor, which is thought to increase the risk of cancer. In this one study done at Harvard, man's greatest hospital, MGH, the men ingesting the soy had 41 million fewer sperm per milliliter. 41 million per milliliter. That's a lot of sperm. Okay. So the more soy they ate, the worse their sperm count.
Let me ask a question, Dr. Rogers, about the longevity of this, because it seems like a lot of farmed animals are being fed soy. And if they are, does that mean that if you're eating that meat, which we would never recommend, that you're also getting soy?
Yeah, you're getting a lot of chemicals from what they feed those animals. And, whatever they spray on it too, there's going to be probably a lot of glyphosate on it, which is a very toxic chemical. It's atherogenic. It increases the risk of autoimmune disease, leaky gut, diabetes, fatty liver. It has some estrogenic effects. It's a brain excitotoxin. The animal is going to be loaded with that stuff.
Well, even beyond that, just the fact that the animal is eating soy and it's going to make up part of that animal's body. When you eat that animal's meat, are you getting some of those negative soy features because you ate an animal?
I haven't seen a paper that shows exactly what you get, but I have read other papers in general that when there's more estrogenic chemicals in there, you're going to get more of them when you eat it. For example, that guy wrote a really good book. His name is Anthony J, PhD. He wrote a book called Estrogeneration, like estrogen generation. And he went all through this stuff on how these animals are fed lots of soy with estrogenic chemicals in it. And the impression I got from reading his book is that that's increasing the estrogenic chemicals absorbed into our body from eating this food. Okay.
Yeah,
Plus
it seems like,
everything.
yeah, if there's a factor there with animal meats, and then there's a factor there with all processed foods that use the cheap soy protein, I have a feeling that the average person is just getting way more soy than they have any idea.
Yeah, I think that's true. And, this paper basically is indicating it's a form of chemical castration. Okay. If you're dropping 41 million sperm per milliliter, that's a lot of sperm. Your fertility ain't going to be so good because a lot of people don't have the greatest fertility to begin with. And then you knock them down this much more, they're not going to be able to have a kid. Another paper here, soy causing precocious solar, early onset of breast development, early onset of menarche, periods. Okay, so it's having a major effect on their reproductive capacity. Okay. Let's see, influence on the onset and tempo of puberty. There's a lot of things about kids having puberty earlier and earlier, which is not good for kids. They're not ready emotionally to handle. Here's another paper on premature thalarc and failure to thrive related to soy exposure in a 7-month-old. Here's the estrogen levels. Like I said, they're off the charts for soy and for flax. Look at these numbers. 161,000 for flax, 4,000, 7,000 for soy. Everything else is like, in the single digits or, double digits at the most, some of these things. This is just a paper showing developmental exposure to the phytoestrogens found in soy was damaging the female reproductive tract. Okay. In infants exclusively consuming soy formulas, plasma isoflavone levels are 13,000 to 22,000 times higher than the plasma estradiol levels. Okay. So, you got normal hormones and you got normal hormone levels, but you're getting these estrogenic chemicals 13 to 22,000 times higher. These basically foreign body chemicals, it's going to mess up your reproductive system. It was associated with abnormal vaginal epithelium, uterine size, breast development, heavier menstruation, increased adult risk of endometriosis, probable increase in fertility, hard for them to test that, increased risk of uterine cancer in mice by 35%. Those are pretty serious effects. And they put this stuff in baby food. It's insane.
That's right. So yeah, all the processed foods, the formulas, the baby food, potentially all the animal meats as well that are farmed. Yeah, it's everywhere.
Yeah, the public's basically being poisoned, okay, and they're too stupid to realize it. Okay, that's why I only eat organic, and I always filter my water.
Yeah. Yep.
I would never eat any, and I only eat single ingredient foods because whenever there's a second ingredient, they can put other stuff in there.
Right, but you're not eating nuts, seeds, and avocados, right?
No, I don't eat any high-fat food.
Okay, yeah, just making sure.
Yeah, and here's an example where they're showing the abnormal uterine histology. The glandular component of the uterus is abnormal when they're exposed to soy. Here's another one. Postnatal genistein exposure causes the oviducts in uterus to become morphologically and molecularly posteriorized. It damages the shape of the human reproductive tract. Okay, it's bad. Here's one that soy has abnormal effects on estrogen-dependent tissue. It's an estrogenic toxin. Okay. And here they say there should be warnings on soy formula product. Okay. There is direct evidence that soy formula feeding is associated with estrogen-induced changes in the human female reproductive tract. Human female reproductive tract. Okay, so for girls, it messes up their reproductive system. Okay, that's a pretty big deal. And so that should not be in infant formulas. And they feed these infant formulas to all these kids. That's a pretty common thing. Soy infant formula. Let's say it's non-organic. Then you got all that glyphosate in there, which is a major toxin to the brain, to the gut, to the liver, etc. Yeah. let's see here. We talked about the additives. We don't even know the significance of GMO. There's always more stuff. We don't got time to get into all this stuff.
Well, it's bad. I mean, you've convinced me.
Bad. I think it's not even bad. It's really bad. So why ingest it? You know, this was that one paper by the Soy Institute.
Well, right now, it doesn't sound like it's as straightforward. You really have to go out of your way to make sure you're not getting this because it's sneaking in all over the place.
Yeah, and then another thing is they'll do a study where they'll compare meat and dairy with soy. So they'll take something pretty unhealthy like a diet with meat and dairy, and they'll put soy in there, the competitive diet, and it won't look so bad because it's being compared to meat and dairy, but it's not being compared to regular healthy low-fat plant foods.
Right.
That's a way to make it look good. And what people don't realize is tons and tons of research in the modern journals is all fake. The corporations are buying this. So this is one company, Bayer, they test research before they believe it, if they think it might affect their own products. And what they found was 75% of the research study on pharmaceuticals are bogus. They can't be reproduced. In psychology journals, they'll find at least 65% of the papers are not reproducible, which means they're bogus. Okay, so that's telling you something. The quality of scientific publications has become a joke. And you really have to be kind of shrewd to get to the truth. And that's why I also say the only thing that can save healthcare and all this other stuff is Christian ethics, because unless you care about the truth and doing right by people, you have to care more about that than money, because there's always going to be more money to pay you for lying and tricking people than there is for telling the truth. So it has to come from morals and love of the patient and the public and doing the right thing. Otherwise, it will not exist. You know, like let's say for coronary artery disease, you do open heart surgery, $150,000 total billing for the hospital. You do stent, $30,000 a piece. You teach the vegan diet, you might get it 1 or 2,000 if you're lucky. That's 100% cure rate. Esselstyn says anybody who took his diet, not a single one of them ever had a recurrent cardiovascular event if they followed his diet. But yeah. What's the reduction in coronary artery disease, cerebral vascular, cardiovascular events if you have open heart surgery? It's 0%. Stenting, 0%, because they don't treat the causative lesions. So what I'm trying to say is the procedures that cost $30,000 to $150,000 have a 0% cure rate, whereas the $1,000 to $2,000 cost, or even free, like we're giving this information for free, it's 100% cure rate, but there's almost no reimbursement. So unless you care about the patient, you have to have Christian ethics, or you have to love the patient, or you're always going to make so much more money by lying and ripping people off that you're never going to get the truth in journals. You're never going to get the truth in a hospital, because the truth's not profitable.
Are you finished with the slides there, Dr. Rogers?
Just about. Let me see if I got anything else good. I already said enough about soy. Omega-3 fats are also bad. They're kind of like have a little bit of a health halo, which is bogus. They increase your risk of obesity. They increase your risk of coronary artery. They increase your risk of atrial fibrillation. They suppress the immune system. In animal studies, they increase the risk of metastatic cancer. I would avoid them.
Are you saying that AFib is potentially created by high-fat diets?
Yeah, because something that's atherogenic is going to plug up arteries in the heart, and that's going to damage heart muscle, and that's going to increase your risk of atrial fibrillation. But the surprise was, in recent years, there's been multiple publications showing increased risk of atrial fibrillation in people who take increased amounts of omega-3s, like omega-3 supplements.
I see.
I think omega-3 supplements are a bad idea. Okay, and one last thing on flax, it also contains these cyanogenic glycosides, which I would avoid, because some people are taking cyanocobalamin, which I wouldn't do. I only take methylcobalamin. But look at all these little cyanides adding up. A little bit of cyanide from your flax, a little bit of cyanide from almonds, a little bit of cyanide from cyanocobalamin. When do you start damaging yourself? Is that reversible, irreversible? I don't know, but I would avoid this stuff. Okay, right. And there's a small amount of those things in cassava and in sorghum. I would avoid those things. Okay. And they recommend no flax for pregnant women because it's estrogenic and it can affect the reproductive system. Oh yeah, flax also associated with puberty onset early, longer menstrual cycles. Like I said, it's Tweedledee and Tweedledum, increased urine thiocyanates. Yeah, from detoxification of your cyanides. Okay. And then the people who are promoting it will say, oh, it's only a small amount of cyanide. Well, you know what? I don't want any cyanide. Okay. Why would I want any?
Yeah.
All right. So that's pretty much all I got here. Negative effect. It's also goitrogenic. Like I said, flax is very much like soy in terms of its effects. Goitrogenic, obesogenic. Okay. Flax stimulating premature puberty, So it has these reproductive system effects. All right. So that's basically it.
You mentioned cassava in there. What did you say about cassava?
That also has a little bit of cyanide-like effect. And I'm sure it's minuscule, but what I'm saying is I wouldn't go looking for it. Okay. And I think that also is often contaminated by lead or something. Oh, stop sharing. I got to hit the stop sharing button. Okay, yeah, there we go.
Okay, so avoid it for the cyanide part of it, like you mentioned earlier. Avoid all those, it sounds like. Okay, so let's summarize everything. You're saying that fat is a toxin, and probably the most prevalent toxin in the average person's diet. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, because yes, people are going to say, well, you need some fat. Yes, you do need some fat. But what I'm saying is you automatically get it. It's impossible to be too low in fat. If you made every effort you possibly could to reduce your fat, you would still get more than enough fat. So it's wise to minimize it.
So that comes down to compliance. You mentioned that, whether someone's stuck to it or not is whether they saw results in some of the studies that you just showed. So what I see out there is the average person eating way too much fat. So one of the things that we've come up, that's come up in our events and things that we do is the idea of rice. We haven't talked about rice, but there's brown rice and there's white rice. And I know white rice is significantly lower in fat than brown rice, even though brown rice isn't super high. When you work that into the average person's diet, do you think that would get more benefit from white rice than brown?
I personally prefer white rice. White rice is only 1% of calories from fat. I don't know the exact percentage of calories from brown rice because I never think about it, but it's higher. That makes it more prone to rancidity, to spoiling faster. You can store white rice, just leave it on a shelf for a long time. White rice is only 1% of calories from fat. The other big reason, though, I went to white rice is because it's less at risk to take up arsenic. In the process of making it into white rice, you remove some of the arsenic. Whenever I cook it, I always rinse it twice. I've been eating rice for many years. I've been happy with it. I never had any problems. Dr. McDougall said he never saw a single case of arsenic toxicity. I think the arsenic in rice got overhyped because of, people like to badmouth a health food. Because there's arsenic in a lot of other foods. And I think the arsenic levels are pretty minimal, but it is wise, to try to find a brand that's low in arsenic and to rinse it.
Okay, well, that's good enough. I mean, so the average person, it's a journey for them. So hopefully if you're out here watching this video, I'm very thankful that Dr. Rogers is here conveying this to you. And you just need to stick with the low-fat foods as much as you possibly can and try to work out these foods that we talked about today. Work out the oils. Get rid of the nut seeds and avocados and soy. And, if you got a choice between brown and white rice, stick with white. All these things are going to move you in the way of lower and lower fat, which is going to optimize your health, I think, right?
Yeah, it's going to help keep your arteries open because that's what you want. Most people, basically, hypertension and diabetes caused by high-fat diets and high-sodium diets plug up arteries. And then when the arteries are plugged up, the tissues just starts becoming progressively deteriorated, damaging, shrinking, becoming sclerosed, fibrotic. And then the person starts fading out. There's other simultaneous damaging things happening, but that's the big major driver towards disease in the Western world.
Yeah.
So you want to avoid. There's also a component of toxicology, but we haven't got time to go into all that stuff today. But the major thing, like you could just change tomorrow, is minimize your fat intake. If you're diabetic or hypertensive and on meds for that, you need to work with your healthcare provider to lower your dosages because your blood pressure drops pretty fast when you minimize your fat intake, and your blood sugar can also drop really fast. So you have to work with your healthcare provider to minimize your drug dosages so you don't bottom out your pressure or bottom out your sugars.
Definitely. And I'd say, we always say, if you can find a board certified lifestyle medicine practitioner, use that doctor. They probably have a little more knowledge in this area. And also our nonprofit does our own 6-pillar healthy vegan food standard. And one of the pillars is no added oil and that fat cannot exceed 10%. So it follows along with everything that you said here, Dr. Rogers, in this video. And, just know that we're out there. When we produce events, our events meet that standard. So anyway, that's it for this month. And we look forward to talking to you again next month with another interesting discussion and challenging for everybody and all the insights you give, because I think anybody who watches this video to its completion is convinced that you have to do it. The only question is, how are you going to do it? So just when you finish up with this video, just start. Get rid of all the high-fat foods in your house. That's what I would say. Just get rid of them. Even if it means donating to somebody or just throwing them away, you're probably better off, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you got to keep your arteries open. Everything in your body works better with good blood flow.
That's right. So I'm going to enjoy the rest of my day because my blood is flowing really nicely. And I'm outside here. And I hope you have a good rest of the day as well, Dr. Rogers. And we'll see you next month.
Yep. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.